CR101radio.com, podcasts, and more.
10. Death of God Thinking. Chalcedon Report number 41, January the 1st, 1969. The death of God movement is one of the deepest and most powerful forces in the modern world. The mistake most people make in trying to understand it is that they only see its most obvious manifestation in men like Altizer. But the death of God movement is everywhere, and it is extremely powerful in conservative and evangelical circles. This point is important, very important. Let us examine it briefly but carefully. If a man professes to be a Christian and yet is guilty of sexual offences against God's law, he is, in effect, saying, by his persistent contempt of the law, that, for him, God is dead in the area of sexual morality. He is denying, to all practical intent, that God and his law govern the sphere of sexual activity, and he must therefore be classified, whatever his religious profession, as a member of the God is dead school. Now, the same reasoning applies to every other sphere of life. If a man professes to be a Christian and yet favours the public or statist schools and sends his children to them, he is declaring that God is dead in at least the sphere of education. He is denying the sovereignty and the existence of God for educational life. No less than the sexual offender, he is saying that God is dead and can be safely disregarded in the area of education. To speak even more plainly, some who find fault with my emphasis on free schools as against state schools, and Christian education as against statist, humanistic education, tell me that we should concentrate on, quote, realistic, end quote, objectives, like keeping the public schools in line or getting prayer back into the public schools. But trying to make socialistic education work for freedom or humanistic education serve God is like trying to make adultery a respectable part of marriage. Education is either under God or it is under man and man's authority. The purpose of education cannot be the service of the state, public schools, or the service of the church, parochial schools, but the service and glory of God. No school can serve two masters. Ultimately, it will serve the church or the state rather than God. And our public schools and church schools are steadily revealing their true nature. But to go a step further, some very devout ministers have taken exception to my emphasis on economics and the gold standard. They feel I should be, quote, preaching the gospel, end quote, instead. And, of course, I am. I am declaring the good news that God is alive and governs not only the church, but the state, school, science, economics, agriculture, art, and every other sphere. Our modern economics is the death of God economics. It denies that God exists and governs the sphere of economics by his law. The statist economics of our day holds that economic truths are relative truths, that the state can determine economic policy in terms of its needs and without reference to objective law. But, quote, conservative, end quote, or, quote, libertarian, end quote, economics has become no less relativistic. Its position is anarchistic. Since there is no truth, no absolute truth, then let a free market exist for all ideas. As a result, some prominent, quote, libertarian, end quote, economists have become strong friends of radical causes and bitter enemies of Christianity. One professor told me of his, quote, libertarian, end quote, economist colleague who regards as the great enemy of libertarianism Christianity, because with its authoritative and infallible Bible, its doctrine of an absolute God and his absolute truth, it denies a free marketplace for all ideas. As against all this, we must affirm that God's law is alive and operative in economics as in every sphere. We must affirm that economic disaster looms ahead for our relativistic economics because it denies God's absolute laws. And that disaster draws daily closer. Federal Reserve statistics indicate that by November 1968, the money supply for 1968 had been increased by 23%. That spells approaching runaway inflation. But even more serious, all this new paper money pumped into the economy failed to give the demanded inflationary prosperity, and federal income via taxes was definitely lower. Now, even greater inflation is planned for 1969, and Washington, D.C. expects the paper dollar to be worth radically less. Accordingly, almost certainly, before Nixon takes office, President Johnson will institute large pay raises, which take effect within 90 days, unless killed by Congress. Congress will see its salaries go from $30,000 a year to $50,000, the Chief Justice from $40,000 to $75,000, and Associate Justices from $39,000 to $65,000, and so on. These salary increases are based on anticipated inflation, so that we have here a vivid illustration of what the Capel Commission expects to happen to the dollar. If a man denies God's existence in the economic sphere and fails to prepare for the future in terms of godly economics, he will fall under the same judgment as all other profligates and unbelievers. But, to continue, a man may claim to believe in God when he is actually an atheist to all practical intent, if he tries to separate religion and the state, if he denies God his sovereignty over the state. It is impossible to separate religion and state. All law is enacted morality, and all morality rests on religious foundations and is the expression of religion. Thus, every legal system, that is, every state, represents a religious order and is a religious institution. The state cannot be neutral to religion. It is either Christian or anti-Christian. A state may be neutral with respect to churches, that is, the particular institutional forms of Christianity, but it cannot be neutral with respect to Christianity. Today, Christianity is in the process of being disestablished as a religion of Western states, and humanism is rapidly being established as the official religion of church, state, and school. The decisions of the courts increasingly have little reference to Christianity and older legislation. They are religious decisions which promulgate the faith of humanism. It is amusing, and not at all surprising, that some humanists, like Erich Fromm, are proposing a humanistic Vatican to be called the, quote, national voice of the American conscience, end quote, to make technology subservient to humane ideals. Erich Fromm, A Revolution of Hope. See also Kimmis Hendrick. Fromm proposes volunteer group to humanize technology in the Christian Science Monitor, December the 7th, 1968, page 21. In every area, all authority is, in essence, religious authority. The religions vary from country to country, but authority is in essence religious. When men deny the ultimate and absolute authority of God, they do so in the name of another ultimate authority, the autonomous consciousness of man. Where authority is broken, either chaos and anarchy will reign after a time, or brutal coercion will prevail. As Hilaire du Berrier, in his superb reports, has pointed out, the tragedy of Vietnam is due to the destruction of the emperor's authority. The emperor's authority has politico-religious roots which went deep into the life of Vietnam. As Christians, we may rightly hold that a Christian theistic doctrine of authority should prevail, But we may not destroy institutions by revolutionary activity. We must create new institutions by means of new, converted men. But, to return to Rushdoony reports, the weakness of South Vietnam is the inability of any of the successive governments to command authority in a situation where every man now feels, with the emperor gone, that he is as much an authority as the head of the state. In North Vietnam, legitimate authority has been replaced by brutal coercion, and this coercion seeks to replace the old authority with a new and Marxist concept. Science, too, must be under authority, or it will make itself the authority. We should not be surprised at the article written by the British anthropologist Edmund R. Leach. We scientists have the right to play God. The Saturday Evening Post, November the 16th, 1968, pages 16 and 20. And why not? Leach's point is logical. A God is needed, and if God is dead, as Leach believes, then the scientists, as the new authorities, must play God and have the right to do so, if not a duty. We have no right to be surprised at this. We have so long been a part of the God is dead movement. Dead in education, in economics, in the state, in science, arts, and all things else, that we should at least recognize that our chickens are coming home to roost. And when we have claimed God is dead everywhere else, should we be surprised that his death is being proclaimed in the churches? In short, Altizer and his cohorts who proclaim the God is dead theology are more logical than the conservatives and evangelicals who are shocked by this, but fail to see their part in this movement. The truth is, our finest people have become sadly schizophrenic. They believe in God, and they live sober, godly, and productive lives, but they have not and do not wage war against the God is dead movement as it takes over one domain of life after another. Outside the church and their personal lives, they have joined the death of God movement. But a man cannot serve two masters. Sooner or later, he will hate the one and serve the other. The same is true of the unbeliever who tries to cling to aspects of the Christian worldview. Mark Twain was a sad case in point. He was a professed agnostic who still retained a biblical frame of reference. For example, he saw man as a sinner, thoroughly depraved and fallen, and at this point, Mark Twain was at war with his age. In 1884, he decided to satirize the already growing romantic view of the American Indian, and so he started to write a Huck Finn and Tom Sawyer among the Indians. He used some actual historical narratives as his basic story. Tom Sawyer, believing in the noble savage, the marvelous natural man, was to have his faith destroyed. The book is very amusing as it begins, as Tom spouts the liberal view of man, the noble savage as against the polluted white man. But Peggy Mills is taken captive, and Twain recorded this, and he knew what it meant. Richard Dodge had described it in a book. How Indians customarily treated a recalcitrant female captive, tying her to pegs in the grounds with thongs and then abusing her until, not infrequently, death releases her. Life magazine says that Twain stopped writing and left the book unfinished because he was, by modern standards, a hopelessly prudish Victorian. Huck Finn and Tom Sawyer among the Indians, Life, December the 20th, 1968, page 50A. But this is grossly unfair to Twain. The truth is, the book had ceased to be funny. It was no longer a Tom Sawyer book, but a grim encounter with human depravity, with fallen man. The answer was beyond laughter, beyond satire. It was a grim, religious issue, and Twain dropped it. He was unwilling to push his view of man to its logical end, but he was equally unwilling to push his unbelief to its logical end. As Dr. Van Til has often written, man fights epistemological self-consciousness. Man refuses to know the truth about himself and about his knowledge. When faced with the ultimate issues, he drops them and turns to trifling things. As Douglas M. Scott observed of Goethe's Faust, we see a scholar who has exhausted the resources of study and bursts out to experience what holds the world together, to learn the inmost secrets of creation, and what does he experience? A student brawl in a tavern and a love affair in which he plays an inglorious part. Douglas M. Scott, Ur Faust, a translation, Woodbury, New York, Barron's Educational Series, 1958, page 24. Faust, in effect, proclaimed the death of God when he turned to Mephistopheles for power and wisdom. But the end result was that Faust became a trifler and a seducer, and he died. The real proclamation of Faust from the onset was the death of Faust. He died to the real world for the imagined world of Satan and Satan's false authority. Marlowe's Faustus, as he turned to the black arts, declared, "Oh, what a world of profit and delight, of power, of honour, of omnipotence is promised to the studious artisan. All things that move between the quiet poles shall be at my command." He dreamed of becoming a mighty god, and ended a frightened, crying man. Not God, but Faustus ended dead. And so it is today. Either we become alive to God in every sphere of life, or we become to that extent dead to him. But God remains alive